I'm going to fill in for Gerhard. I don't think he's in the room.
Okay, thanks, Ulrike.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. I just did a very quick, this is really not an academic thinking process. This is really just my thoughts on how new teaching models have impacted the work of IDs. And this is my personal reflection just to kickstart the discussion. So I can just really say that I can echo the thoughts of the previous speaker that says academics expected us to have solutions to all the various uncertainties. And I really felt that the scope of our work increased. I loved it because in a sense, suddenly, you know, we didn't have to go to faculties and ask them to make use of our services. They ran to us. So in that sense, it was really great. And I really loved the way the various communities stood together, not just nationally, but internationally. We utilized OERs from various communities. I think we drew the most of our OERs from Cape Town University, which we were really thankful for because they were a bit quicker to get it up than we were, so we could just utilize that. And then also some of the resources from some of the international communities we made use of. So there was great investment in technologies and we needed to stay ahead of the curve. Sometimes we were caught off guard. I would get a request to assist with a technology like Panopta and not even know that we had Panopta. And then I had like the evening to figure it out and then help the lecturer the next day. So it's all fun and exciting, but at the same time, it's a bit stressful. By the way, Panopta is really great. If you haven't got it, you can really look into it. And then we as a team assisted lecturers to pivot online, and we really made use of the team approach. We worked with the educational technologists because you know, they really clued up with the technology side of the LMS, and the learning designers helped with the learning design and thinking how we can pivot online. And we created a lot of best practice documents just to put it out there and for lecturers to be able to go through it on their own. And we posted that on a website, and we networked a lot with our colleagues, also asking each other, you know, from different universities, how are you approaching this? What are you doing? And that really helped a lot. And we supported lecturers both emotionally and technically. And I think the emotional bit was something that was never present before, because lecturers would never tell me how much they're battling or anything like that. And I found that really draining. It might be because I'm really sensitive, but to me, giving technical support is really not draining, but the emotional side was very draining to me. And we had to settle for good enough for now, learning designs. So I would sometimes just look at the learning design and think, okay, this is an emergency. We just have to cope. Let's just let it go because there's 50 other ones we have to deal with. And for our work for the future, I can really see that those good enough for now designs, we have to really relook, redesign. And then in terms of professional development, I can see that there's a great need to develop data literacy amongst ourselves, but also for lecturers. With the pivot online, we really realized the value of or the importance of things like learning analytics and the importance of keeping up to date with artificial intelligence. And yeah, that is quite a steep hill to climb, but we have to be proactive and be there first, because we have to lead the lecturers in that journey. Thank you.
Ulrike, thanks very much for that. I see Peter's back in the room, but before we switch back to you, Peter, are there any questions for Ulrike so far? If you're not sure or not wanting to speak, please put it in the chat. I don't see anything coming. Peter, are you back in the room, still online?
Thanks, Meg. electricity card, colleagues. So now I think I was almost done. I was flagging the issue of the capacity that we had to intensify our learning designers. So our learning designers had to specifically focus on, focus on the lecturer's needs, while learning developers works on the students' need. So now, one of the things that we also came to realize is the issue of burnout, and due to the on-time support that is actually needed all the time from our colleagues. And with that, we have to make sure that we are quite aware of work, the work schedule for our learning designers, and we have assisted them accordingly, and we have continuous development programs ready for them in terms of capacitating them on the skill required on learning design platform. Thank you.
Any comments, colleagues? Benita, do you have any thoughts on the matter?
Rika, I've posted the question in the chat. One of the things that is quite complex for me within the RD core groups and teams across universities is how do we change and adapt our specialization fields to be more efficient, because we are wearing so many hats and we've got to be so many things within this environment. How do we ensure that we specialize ourselves and adapt? It's in the chat. You can just have a look at that again, maybe just to answer.
Thanks for that, Heinrich. Yes, I think that is really something we need to discuss. I'm just looking at all the participants. Who's got an answer for Heinrich? How do we specialize instead of wearing all of the hats, so that we can really say as learning designers, this is the scope of our work?
Well, I'll attempt to respond to that, though I don't have a definite answer, but this is what we have been working on in the University of the Free State. We actually have realized that we have put our learning designers in faculties, right? And what we also do, we're making sure that these individuals have a background of that respective faculty. So when one has a good background of that particular faculty, is more likely to know what's actually faculty's needs. And that individual also will be housed in the same faculty. And when the curriculum discussions are taking place, challenges that are taking place, this person is actually part of that particular faculty. And when the proposed solutions have been discussed in the faculty, that can actually help the designer in that particular faculty as well, to have some idea on how actually faculty is approaching this particular problem. And that can actually help, besides all this generic training that we expose them to it and so forth. I think that this actually can help us moving forward.
Thanks. I'm back in the room. And I'm just thinking as that happened, it looks like the fiber dropped out as I was talking about it. And I've obviously set up with a mobile modem here, but when students are writing an assessment and exactly how stressful such a situation is for them. I don't know who facilitated on my behalf. I think it was Ulrike. Was it you, Ulrike?
I tried.
Thank you for that. Was Munienge had a chance to speak? Are you in the room, Munienge Mbodila? Still not in the room. One of the things that I was thinking about in all of this at our institution has been the first switch in terms of teaching. Let's call it mode, not a model, but suddenly it was not blended anymore, but hybrid. And so the hybrid discussion kind of came up and working out what that meant. And then we have switched, well, not switched, but we've decided to kind of put hybrid under an umbrella of multimodal teaching. And all of these switches, whether it's blended or whatever you call it, blended, multimodal, hybrid, and then it's particularly high flex in particular, which is very well defined in literature in terms of what that actually is, has got a significant impact on how instructional design needs to be executed, what instructional design needs to be executed. And that in itself is one of the problems that we're facing, is that in comprehensive institutions where you've got a lot of variation in how things are delivered, it kind of doesn't really help matters much, because you can't define the training in an obvious way. So for me, it's that I'm wondering in terms of modality, who's picked up on what modalities, and whether and what the impact have been of that kind of modality that you've switched to, if anything at all. So I don't know if there are any questions or thoughts from the floor on it. Colleagues, is there, I just want to check that everybody can hear me first of all, making sure that just give me a thumbs up, somebody.
We can hear you.
Okay, all good, thank you. And then if there are no questions, I'm waiting in anticipation here for some questions from the floor. From the previous panel, which was looking at changes in staff development, one of the big things that has come up there is the resources for training. And so the one thing is our response to the training and what's going on and the things that instructional designers need to do within that training. But what resources are available, especially in the smaller institutions. WSU and Rhodes, for instance, were on that panel and saying how small their teams are and how important it is then to build these resources. Now, in our particular institution at Mandela University, I've been fortunate enough to have been building a team, and quite a largish team of learning designers, and large being 8 or 9, and we've been working on building the self-help resources and building those out, and we send out things like Moodle tips once a week on our email memos and so forth. But the need for open ed resources in regard to helping not only smaller institutions, but writing the resources that are required to support this process. Because as in the instructional design space, as it's already been highlighted, people are coming and looking for some kind of answer, the panacea. And of course, our answer is like, what do you want? What do you want to build? And then we're taking it straight back at them. And so obviously we try and do it in an iterative process, but the reality is that if you've got self-directed learning or self-help repository, a decent self-help repository, that is something that we need to be working on and as a resource, especially in the smaller environments. But we're also finding that in a large institution such as ourselves, different staff have got different preferences. The user experience and the learning experience for staff is varied, and we need to cater to that. I don't know if there are any thoughts on the open education or the resources and how those might be handled.
I can just add to that, Mike. During the pivot online, when everyone was in emergency mode, I really started to realize how important it is to share your resources in a way that's easy to access. And I can really, I don't know if there's anyone from Cape Town University in the room, but I can really say that I think they do it really, really well, because we could just go to their YouTube presentations, and they'll have a link at the bottom with the open educational resource PowerPoint at the bottom. And you can just download it and change it and share it with the same license again. And I thought that is modeling such good practice, because we all, we all like the idea that there's open educational research repositories, but we've been struggling to get that off the ground. Every year at UP2U, we say we have to share more resources between the universities, but we really don't have a place to do that. And I thought that was a really good way of sharing it.
Yeah, so SILTA have been fantastic, and under Laura Chernovich, setting up those open resources, and they have substantial resources in that regard. And certainly, we've downloaded one or two of those resources ourselves for our own training. But you're right, Ulrike, for us, it's about in our institution, we're also building, we consider what we're building open resource, but we don't really have a platform to put it somewhere. But we are looking to put it into a website in our particular instance, and take it from there in terms of sharing that out. But possibly we need to be looking at a platform. I see Heinrich has got a hand. Heinrich?
Mike, and I think what's been great across the field is all these universities, and yes, I'm glad you're mentioning Prof. Laura, Rhodes University, UJ, etc. There's been this great repository of resources shared, but I think to come back and to allude a bit on the silence that's given when we ask questions about the role and the evolution of instructional design within institutions, I think there's a lot of resources lacking in terms of what's happening in the field. How is it changing? How do we adapt? Because if we are not going to be careful, we're going to evolve into so many hats that we're just going to have the staff retention issue across institutions again. And we've seen that in the last 3-4 years, where instructional designers and e-learning practitioners come into institutions and they sort of have an expiry date of 3 to 4 years because it just becomes too much to do. So I do think specializing and specialization within the field is extremely necessary, not only for the survival, but also for the service agreement that is essential, so that we actually can come to the front and say, look, we are shifting at NWU. We've seen a great shift in instructional design, sort of starting to touch more and more on curriculum development. So what resources can we provide the greater public or the greater ID public to say, look, this is how we are changing and this is what we can share. So just a sort of left side comment on what's been said so far.
So the other thing that is very prevalent in our particular space it is the pressure or the lack of IDs out there. Suddenly everybody's wanting them. So I know when we held prior to lockdown, I forget what the event was called, it was hosted by UCT at the Vineyard Hotel. At that point, all 26 universities were present, and I think there were 14 vacancies across the universities in instructional at that particular point. And I would argue that there's probably more. I'm not sure that vacancies have opened up in those institutions, but there's a much more demand. So new posts, etc., that are being opened to respond to all of this. The other comment that I would make is it's something that Gerhard du Plessis touched on from Northwest, was this idea of structured or guided practice at the student. In other words, you can't just leave them to their own device, and certainly not digitally. And you need to have directed practice. So in other words, we're talking about flipped learning, structured paths. But the implication of that is a huge additional amount of work required to build that guided practice. So instead of, we struggle as it is to build enough, for argument's sake, your ID to build a 1 hour lecture online. Now we're talking about the notional hours that are associated with that lecture also need learning. And so that to me is actually what I see starting to come, is that if you just put a percentage on it based on notional hours, kind of your 1 hour lecture, let's call that 10% of the work is right now, that's 10% of our work as instructional designers is working in that space. I mean, it's not strictly true, but there's this other 9 hours associated with every hour of lecture, depending on what your formula is at the university, of which, of those 9 hours now, perhaps 3 or 4 or however many hours are actually going to be structured. Who's going to build that? Where's that capacity coming from? And so that is a big issue, and it kind of touches on, Ulrika, you mentioned very briefly the role of analytics and AI. And that is going to be fundamentally important going forward to manage this component of it, because I see that notional learning, that flipped class guided practice stuff is like a tsunami-sized wave of instructional design. And we're going to have to be knowing what we're designing, why we're designing it. So analytics has to come into play. And AI is fundamentally important within that particular context. So to understand what is being learned, what is not being learned, etc. So, well, I don't know, mostly our analytics are not comprehensive enough, simply because most institutions are late on the boat. Possibly an institution, the Blackboard institutions, Pre-State and UP, and I don't know who else are still on Blackboard. They may have kind of better data in this stuff, but I'm also not sure that it's accurate enough in terms of being able to make decent decisions around instructional design and what maybe is not necessary to do, or some other approach that is not requiring the intensive kind of what I call studio-based work, you know, a video with some kind of interaction using H5P or whatever your interactive tools are, or even worse, having to use Captivate or Articulate to actually execute some kind of custom approach. You know, that they're just too time-intensive in the current context, but that's not to say they're not necessary. Okay, so there's more thoughts in the room there from my side, but this sounds like a one-person discussion. Anything else from the floor?
I think we should go from the top and call names.
And of course, your name starts with an A. Eh?
No, I don't count. I've had my turn. Andrew, I see you're up next.
Yeah, please put anything into the room. So, you know, so that one of the questions that I really am looking to solve is this issue of capacitation within the ID space, and how we're going to do that. So maybe I'll just share what we have done. I mentioned in the welcome, I'm new to this space really. I've been in the space for 3 years, but I've been a lecturer for 22 years in design, business and technology. And when I say design, we're talking graphic design, visual communication. And so I actually came into the particular space here. I was looking for a way to get our students paid to be able to study honors and masters in the graphic design, creative arts spaces, because there are no bursaries in that particular space. And so I came up with this idea, which was not a super novel idea, but it was basically setting up a studio in the university made up of our postgrad students who could act as learning designers, and then obviously they would be mentored by permanent staff. And that is actually how we've managed to execute. So we've got 9 learning designers, of whom 8 are postgrad students, and they've been in the system a year already. And they're of course mentored by permanent staff instructional designers and our team. And that is how we've built that capacity right now in the short term. Obviously your issue there is that they are not experienced in the context of pedagogy and instructional design per se. But we're going to have to start at the institution, actually start running modules within those programs, introducing instructional design. Is the only way that I can see it in our particular context, solving the issue. Much of the execution of an ID in practical terms within the platforms themselves is graphical work often, and obviously they need to have some understanding of cognitive science, for instance, and how that works, as space practice, interleaving, retrieval, all of these things. And so we've built our own onboarding courses around that as a way of building capacity using our own staff. And also to, I think it was Heinrich's comment, is that they don't hang around long, IDs typically. My view is they don't hang around long because it's not exciting design work. Because I'm used to the creative advertising branding space, which is all sexy and slick and shining lights very often. Instructional design is not that, typically, or not always. So for us, they don't stay engaged because it's not creative enough. And so using this postgrad model that we've implemented works quite well, because it gives them 2 or 3 years in the system while they're doing their honors and their masters, and they're being paid while they're doing that to work in the studio setup. Andrew?
Thanks, Mike. I'm just going to chip in. Hope my audio is okay. Okay, I just wanted to add in there about the data-driven approaches and how to make your students' learning experience more exciting and engaging. I think something that we're pushing for at the institution is the implementation of the H5P learning tools. And that's exciting for both our students and for our lecturers as well. And on the other front, we're trying to push for more bot use inside our lectures inside Microsoft Teams. So just like you're saying, I think the take-up can be a little bit challenging in terms of what's available and how the lecturers can onboard into their platform. But something that we do like about the Microsoft Teams platform, and in our institution, we push for, we call them e-technologists or learning technologists. It's a very flexible hat to wear. But they would do that onboarding process. But in terms of having the groundwork really laid out by Microsoft Teams in terms of Power Automate and some of the other collaborative apps, it makes that learning experience a lot easier. So I think that's something that we're trying to push for more and more. And hopefully at the next UP2U meet, we can share a little bit more about that and how that's working for us in our institution.
So just to piggyback on what Andrew was saying, I'm in the process of setting up an intelligent automation cluster specifically around community of practice within learning and teaching, so that we actually understand how to use the bots, for instance, in team chats, how to individualize learning in large class groups, And obviously, the thing about AI, it doesn't really work very well unless there's enough data. And so the larger class groups are where we're going to start until we're able to work out patterns. But what we're talking about is putting chatbots within teams. Anybody who's looked at the work of David Kellerman from University of New South Wales, he's the poster boy for kind of Microsoft on the edge automation and intelligence in that space. So as I've said, what Andrew's alluding to is that we're building the capacity around that cluster right now. And what's interesting is that because it's an academic facilitated process or place, a community or practice, what we're finding, for instance, our School of Computer Science are considering putting people who are doing their sabbatical, staff who are doing sabbatical research into that particular space. Obviously, it has to align with artificial intelligence or automation or AR or VR. So we've put a lot of kind of thought strategically into that, and also some funding to support that particular process. And as we've done with our learning experience designers, taking that postgrad approach, where we're looking for students who are studying postgrad and their research aligns with what we're looking for, put them into the space, and through their research, they actually help build what we are trying to get built, bots within Moodle or bots within Teams and in the chat space. And then the big issue for us is using automation to be able to take load off the teaching staff. That's one of the big issues. We keep on saying our staff are overloaded and all of this, but actually a large part of the work for staff, especially with big teams, is trying to track their students, especially in the case of our institution, where we've had students who are online and others who are partly online and others who've been completely offline. And so tracking those continually is kind of 80% of your day's work as a lecturer, just trying to follow everybody. So if you can automate all of that, that is a big aspect of what we're trying to achieve with the automation research space. And then the H5P is a really fantastic set of resources, and it costs nothing, which is the fantastic aspect of it, and very easy to use, which means we're able to train the academics to be able to do more interactive work. But of course, your designers and IDs need to understand those tools and understand what they're actually used for. So mapping against Bloom's taxonomy, for argument's sake, mapping those activities against the taxonomy, against the learning outcomes, etc. Ulrike?
Yeah, I just want to know if H5P is still free to use, because in one of the previous sessions, we spoke about how we implement technologies, and then the first year it's free, and by the time we've managed to roll it out at scale, it's no longer free. And then you have to go back and search either for an alternative, or you have to pay the fee. So I just want to know if it's still free, because I heard somewhere that it's not free anymore.
Yeah, so I can't, well, I can answer it in this way, is that in Moodle, it is integrated as core into the system, so it is free. But you guys are on Sakai, and so for the Sakai users, I'm not sure what the situation is anymore. And Canvas and Blackboard, I think, can integrate. I'm not sure about Blackboard, but Canvas certainly can. H5P can integrate into those systems. And whether that integration comes with some kind of cost, I do not know. Is anybody in the room who can answer that question? On the other platforms other than Moodle, is H5P paid for, or is it still free? I don't see any answers in the chat or online, Ulrike.
I see on the site it says it's free to use.
Yeah, so
there's hidden cost somewhere.
Yeah, no, so not on the tool, but they do have a cloud version. In other words, where you're running the activities off of their cloud infrastructure. And again, for us, that is not feasible because of the data constraints, and it takes us out of the learning system onto a cloud service. And then you're sitting with the costs again in terms of your whitelisting of your URL and so forth.
Sorry, Mike, I just wanted to also agree with you that on Moodle, then it's free because it comes with the automatically the program and download. Then on others, like use it separately on the cloud and other things, then I think there's a fee attached to it.
So yeah, so it's definitely free. There were issues, and I don't know where we are on that right at this very minute, but in the case of Moodle, it has an app for offline working, and there was issues with H5P on the offline, but that was prior to full integration. It used to be a plugin, and now it's completely integrated as core to the system. Colleagues, the session's coming to a close in a minute. So if there are any other questions, just chuck them in the chat. Orica, I don't know if you've got another hand up, or is it an old hand or legacy hand? I'm going to be
an old down and sorry. I just see there's someone who commented in the chat. H5P is available as a paid license if you want to track and integrate to LMS like the Blackboard.
Yeah. So again, what we're setting up as part of that AI integration story that we're doing is an LRS. So it's a learning record store that will pull out any XAPI or LTI based activity in any SCORM package or in H5P. So then if you're doing it that way, that there are free LRSs, you don't have to do it, but obviously there's manpower required to get the integration done. So it would cost even at institutional level, but not a hard cost on a subscription. Okay, colleagues, I'm going to leave it there as we're moving to the large plenary session. Thanks very much, and hopefully you've managed to get some useful information out of this session. Nicola, can I hand over to you?